Welcome back, everyone, to episode number 42 of the Beginner to Master Speedrun. I know it's been a little while since I posted the last episode. I did take a break, so thanks for everyone's patience. But coming back, hopefully we'll come back strong. I'm currently on an undefeated streak of 131 games. Rating today is 1642. And it was time to update my profile picture. So I found a photo of a time, I think I was in like 4th or 5th grade, so 10 or 11 years old. I was rated around 1600 US rating at that time. So yeah, maybe I'll play some of the openings that I played back then in this episode. But let's just hop into it. First game starting now. Okay, first opponent playing IH, etc. And yeah, back when I was 1600, I was still playing King's Pawn. We'll keep it in normal territory. We'll have an Italian. D3. Okay, so this is usually a bit more positional than the immediate C3 and D4. Not seeing an Evans Gambit. I'll just play Knight F6. I don't really mind allowing Bishop G5 because there's cases where I can play H6 G5. But Bishop E3, a very solid move. I'll just drop back with the bishop to B6. If takes, then I'll be happy to open the A file, and double pawns aren't that bad on the queen side in that case. I'll play D6 here. Really just trying to complete development. And I think I'll also castle kingside. So we're entering a pretty typical Italian position. Pretty symmetrical pawn structure. I guess with exception that white's played this move, pawn h3. So I can't immediately play bishop g4. Now with queen d2, it seems like white's just kind of doing their own thing. And I do have a few options here. I could maybe consider h6, although I don't think there's really a need to play h6 immediately. There's bishop e6, which does challenge the bishop on c4. But I'm going to go for a different move, and it's one of my favorite plans in these sort of Italian middle games, is to reroute the knight to g6. I think I can do that right away, knight g6. Another point of moving the knight away from the queen side is so I can play pawn c6. And there will be cases where maybe I can get in pawn d5, expand in the center. White trying to be aggressive, okay. Knight g5, so targeting f7, but I mean f7 is currently defended enough times. So, I mean, if I play h6, white could go back, not really accomplishing much there. So I'm going to continue with c6. I'm basically trying to set up this pawn d5 move. And if white takes twice on f7, I was going to say that's almost always a good trade for the black side. Two minor pieces are usually much for choice over rook and pawn. But with bishop to b3, yeah, so, I mean, d5 now doesn't come with tempo to attack the bishop. d5 would still threaten pawn d4. And it is defended 3 times, so it would be sufficiently defended. I'm calculating d5. I mean, if we trade bishops, I would take back with the pawn, and then takes, and then takes. And that looks pretty good. I mean, I'm basically taking over the center there. I'm going to go for this. Okay, so we do trade the pawns. Now, having 2 pawns in the center like this, I mean, sometimes pawns can be very strong. Other times they could be targets. Definitely have to keep a watchful eye with the d5 pawn. Attack twice. White plays a3, so kind of slow playing. And now it's a question how to basically complete development. I mean, the move I want to play is bishop e6, but I don't want to allow knight takes e6. I could start with pawn h6, make the knight move back, but then there's going to be pressure eventually against the e5 pawn. So looking for other options here. I could start with rook e8. This actually looks very natural. I could also play h6, make the knight move back, and then rook e8. I'm going to go for that. Just making sure there's no issue with pawn on f7. And let's play rook e8. Okay, white's playing very quickly, so I do have to be cognizant of time. Now there's two attackers against both pawns, but the center is still pretty well defended. I'm going to go for queen d6 here. Just central square for the queen. Reinforcing e5 pawn. And so far, this whole like opening and middle game strategy has just been about trying to control the center and build up the center. I still want to develop the bishop very soon. I'm trying to figure out what the ideal square would be for this bishop. Maybe on c6 it could be useful. And then eventually the other rook can come in. But knight b5, okay, so white's attacking the queen. I don't want to allow knight c7, so like queen e6 would be a terrible move. Queen c6. I was thinking my bishop would go to c6, but a queen coming to c6 I think is fine. Keeping c7 covered, also attacking the knight. White plays a4, so this is basically an outpost on b5. Now, yeah, I no longer have this idea of bishop d7 to c6, but I think the bishop is decently placed on f5. Like, even though it's kind of staring at this pawn chain, the bishop's not super effective here. It is a nice central square, and it gets out of the way of this rook. And the plan is very simply to play rook a d8 and just have a nice center. Maybe rook a d8 and eventually... I was thinking pawn e4, but that could walk into knight d4. And white's being very clear with her intention of doubling up. If I play knight f4, I lose a pawn. So maybe I just defend the pawn, knight d7. Making sure the pawn is defended 3 times. Let's also attack 3 times now. Maybe I can play rook e7 and then double up on the e-file. Like, it seems like the center is still pretty solid. Like, even though it seems delicate, just so much pressure on e5, it's a big focal point. I'm actually just realizing here, I did allow kind of a nasty move, knight d4. And if I take, then, yeah, the e7 rook would be lost. Yeah, we'll see if white can find it. I think if white plays this move, I might be in a bit of trouble. Let's calculate. Knight d4, queen f6. So the problem is after takes, there's bishop takes d5. The queen is driven away from defending the d5 pawn. But there might be the possibility of knight d4, queen f6, takes. I might have the save. Okay, well, never mind. I was thinking knight f4 in the end. White is going for a different idea, which I did not see coming. I think this is okay, though, because white clearly wants to play this move, but I have this move. And white sacrificed the bishop for a pawn, and even if white wins a rook for knight, Now it's a situation where I have, what, knight and bishop for rook and pawn. And I was briefly saying earlier that generally the two minor pieces are much for choice than rook and pawn. But I'll still have to prove it. I'll still have to move a bit quicker too. I'm going to play queen e8, really supporting the pawn. I'm trying to give mobility to this knight. I mean, ideally I want to play knight f4. Okay, white's building up the pressure. So if I play knight f4, it looks good. Knight f4. Even though I remove a defender of e5, I do hit the rook. Rook takes e5, loses material. And now I have the fork. Yeah, I'm pretty sure white had to play rook d2 there to not lose material. Definitely a hard-fought game so far, but yeah, finally looking like pretty good for black. Once I win the rook, I'll be up bishop for pawn. And now it's a matter of trying to simplify. I could go for e4. I think I'll just go for f6 though. Just a stabilizing move. Okay, let's save the bishop. I'm trying to imagine like what the optimal squares are for my pieces. White's trying to put on the pressure. Queen h6 is a threat. I have queen h5. Queen h5 looks like a safe move. I do allow knight g6 and then rook e8. There's actually cases where if the knight goes in, then it might end up getting trapped. I am threatening bishop f7 now. And as far as I can see, the knight doesn't have an easy place to retreat. Now, white's being resourceful. Okay, setting up knight e7. I mean, queen d1 check is a move. Also just go for bishop f7, knight e7, and move the king over. White also wants to come in with the queen like this. So I do have to be careful. Actually thinking king h7 here. Oh, but king h7, knight f8 is not possible. Yeah, for a moment I thought this is a fork, but I have enough pieces covering that square. And now I can play queen f7. And I'm pretty sure the knight is trapped. Covering... Oh, no, it's not trapped. Oh, there's knight g6. Okay, it still takes work. Maybe f5 now. Yeah, the knight is kind of slippery. Hard to actually catch. I could play g5. I think I will play g5. There's cases where this can be weakening, but I think in this case, it's nice to gain space. And I'm just going to offer the queen trade. Trying to simplify. White was maybe threatening rook takes g5 there with my queen still on f7. Yeah, there were some fork ideas. But we trade queens. And yeah, now it's cleanup time. This is actually really nice because now I'm trapping the rook. And the knight escaped from being trapped, but the rook will not escape. Yeah, in situations like this where you're up material but low on time, usually you just want to like make quick moves, try and win more material, try and simplify, keep improving the pieces. I'll go for knight to e3. I'm going to go after this pawn. Rook g7 is the plan. Okay, in this case, I'll take the knight. Control the file. And win the pawn. Okay, plenty of time. Checkmate is incoming. Okay, a very good fight. I was probably a little bit in trouble, like, somewhere in the middle game. I mean, overall, I think there's some nice lessons to take away from this game. Opening seemed very solid, maybe for both sides. Just going forward here, can load up the eval bar. Yeah, relatively quiet opening. And yeah, this is a nice idea to know for anyone that plays against Italian. Sometimes players will develop their pieces and just not know what to do in the middle game, but this sort of plan just leads to very fluid play for black. So going forward, after knight e7, knight c3, knight to g6, it seemed like my opponent didn't quite know what to do, and I was making the improvements. But my opponent was still very solid, and everything was going fine. The knight b5 was a nice resourceful move. And then, yeah, with rook e2, I probably just didn't handle the position appropriately. Knight e7, rook e1, rook e7. Yeah, the engine is saying white's like clearly better if my opponent finds a move knight f to d4. Now, I was calculating knight b d4, but this is not as good. Yeah, the line I was calculating was queen f6, takes, and if bishop takes d5, I have knight f4, and there's some nice counterplay with the rook attacked and the bishop attacked. Bishop e4 doesn't quite work because I take the rook with check. So, of course, that would have been playable for white. But somehow knight f d4 is stronger. What's the difference? Queen f6. Ah, knight c7 here. So knight should stay on b5 because it can do damage. And I'm getting forked all over the place. Rook and pawn are attacked. If I move the rook, I get forked with the queen and other rook attacked. So this could have been very, very bad. Of course, this is kind of a hard move to find. Like, it's hard to actually realize the pin on the e-file and the fact that white can exploit the queen and bishop like this. But thankfully, my opponent missed the chance, played bishop takes d5, and I think as we saw in the game, this just didn't lead to much for white. It was actually a good transformation for black. And yeah, after knight to f4, minor pieces are just very nice to have in such a position. White should have played rook d2, and the game would have kept going. I think f6 is nice to somehow prepare the kingside attack. But of course, in the game, my opponent blundered the fork, and then I think it was pretty smooth from here. Even though my opponent was tricky with the queen, knight, and rook all coordinating, I thought I trapped the knight, but I didn't. But I kept improving, and yeah, eventually simplified and won more material. So nice game to start the episode. Let's keep it going. I'll do another. Rated 1650. Playing, I was going to say playing Damagad, but that's just damaged. Damaged 88. Opponent's going for maybe not a Scholar's Mate. Some kind of weird Ponziani. Interesting. It's not an opening I've seen before. I'm just going to develop normally. Knight to f6. And it seems like my opponent wants to play this move and build up pressure with pinning the knight. Now, I'm inclined to play d5 right away, but d5, bishop g5, it's a little bit annoying. And this might be a situation where I just play h6. I think I will. Usually I don't like playing such a move because usually you should like focus on developing, but I think there was enough reason to prevent bishop g5. And now I can happily play d5. Try and get an active position and trade in the center. Yeah, going forward here, I mean, one of the plans is to try and exploit the queen on f3. Another plan, maybe not quite a plan, but it's more of a tactic, is do I have this move knight takes b4? The idea would be after pawn takes b4, there's queen d4. If we get to that position, I'm pretty sure I just win the rook on a1. This is a tactical motif that you don't see too often, but usually arises from a player kind of pushing too quickly on the queen side without actually developing the pieces. And yeah, I'm going to go for this. I don't really see how white deals with it. Queen d4. Always have to watch out for, like, when I do take the rook, I have to watch out if white can exploit the queen on a1, but I mean, assuming I take the rook, I'm attacking the knight and the pawn, both of which are undefended. White's still very far away from castling too. Now I'm going to win the knight and the rook. So this is a much different feel compared to the previous game. Yeah, bishop d2 I take with check. I'm thinking if king d1, like, is it worth playing knight d4 first? Hitting the queen, setting up queen c2 or the eventual bishop a4. Yeah, I think my opponent just got very damaged there from early on. And it all stemmed from this nice tactical idea in the opening. Again, not a tactic that you see every day, but definitely something to watch out for, just considering the captures in the position and seeing what's vulnerable in the opponent's position. In this case, it was a rook on a1. And yeah, the engine supports the sequence for black. So I don't think there's much to really address from this game. Yeah, maybe h6 wasn't necessary. Stockfish says that I should have played d5 right away. And if bishop g5, then yeah, black can keep developing. But I didn't want to allow takes. Engine just says takes, and yeah, black's doing quite well. I think both approaches were fine. h6 maybe makes life a bit more difficult for white to play actively. So, okay, quick game. Let's do one more. Playing mate in 10,111. Okay. This time I'm white. I'll play e4. I'm debating whether to play, I was going to say Italian or Ponziani, but this is a Philidor. So usually against a Philidor, I like to play d4 immediately. The drawback of this opening, it does cut off the bishop for black. So Philidor defense does have a slightly more passive reputation, because usually the bishop is confined to either e7 or sometimes g7. And meanwhile, the development for white is very fluid. And there are options of like how to proceed with putting the bishop on e2 or c4. I think I'll just play more actively. Bishop to c4 looks pretty good. And I'll castle as well. I'm actually just beginning to wonder, like if black plays c6 here, okay, we see c5. Maybe I can analyze after the game, like if black goes for c6 and b5, if I had the same tactic with taking and trapping the rook. But yeah, that's something to analyze later. c5 does attack the knight. If I play knight f3, there's bishop g4. If I play knight b3, it doesn't combine well with the bishop on c4. So yeah, I'm actually considering mainly two moves, either knight f5 or knight e2. Knight f5 would make things a bit double-edged. If takes and then takes, get a pawn to f5. I think I'm going to go for knight e2. I think this has a more stable feel. If black were to pin, then there'd be f3. Now I'll complete development. Bishop to f4. One of the drawbacks of black committing to c5 is the d pawn is backwards on d6. It's on the half-open file, and it can't really move forward. I'm controlling d5 4 times. So the plan going into the middle game is probably just to put some major pieces on the d file, maybe eventually win the pawn. It seems like black is trying to figure out how to complete development here. Again, if bishop g4, I play f3. If bishop e6, I'll have a choice. I probably want to take the bishop. Oh, we see knight to a5, which is actually kind of an annoying move, because if I play bishop b3, there's c4. Bishop d3 also c4, trapping the bishop. So I think I'll just play bishop d5 here. I don't really mind if takes. Then I'll get a really nice outpost on d5. And now the knight is kind of left doing nothing on the edge. It seemed like black did want to trade off the knight for the bishop. Okay, bishop e6. Tension is mounting. 2 attackers. I do have 3 defenders. I don't think there's any need to capture. If I capture, I'm probably only helping black open the file, get another center pawn. I mean, there would be one reason to potentially go for this, is after takes, there's a positional move e5 to try and damage black's structure. Like if takes and then takes, black is left with an isolated e-pawn. So I'm looking at takes and e5, and then knight h5, hitting the bishop. It's kind of a long calculation. Takes, lose the bishop, I win the other bishop. And I think the simpler approach here is something like queen d2 or queen d3. Leaning a little bit towards queen d3. The simple idea of getting the rook into d1. Yeah, I'm going to go for this. I think this is way easier to understand. Like, I really just want to keep improving the pieces. And the reason for queen d3 over queen d2 is to potentially swing the queen over via the third rank. Now, one thing I want to point out here is I want to make sure I'm keeping a piece on d5 rather than the pawn. So if I take with the pawn, then it's much harder to access or attack the pawn on d6. I think maybe a lot of people would take thinking that they're gaining space. And maybe this is still a fine move because the knight can't come back. Maybe I'll take a moment here. Like takes, I'm not really threatening to win the knight, and like there is b6, knight b7. Now when I take with the queen, I'm basically keeping the file half open. And yeah, I'm going to just go for this. And it's so much easier to attack the pawn. Like simple plan of probably tripling up with both rooks and the queen on the d file. And it's a situation where black probably wishes a pawn were back on c7 and the knight were back on c6. But yeah, the opponent has to live with the consequences. Queen b6, okay, so attacking the pawn on b2. And this is a case where I probably just want to play a simple defensive move. Either b3 or rook b1. I think I'll play rook b1. b3 maybe would run into bishop f6. Going forward here, I mean, rook fd1 is coming. Perhaps eventually knight c3 to d5. But I'll start with rook d1. There's also the possibility of attacking on the king side. The knight and queen are a bit far away from helping defend the king side. But black is offering a queen trade. If I move too far away, then I would lose e4 pawn. So I'm considering knight c3 here. And if black wants to trade queens, then I can get the knight into d5. And that just looks really, really good. So basically leaving the tension. And if black doesn't trade queens, then maybe I move the queen away and get the knight in. I'm also defending the pawn now, so I could potentially play queen h5 next move. Okay, b5. So black is trying to gain space on the queen side. Looks like my opponent maybe overlooked a simple sequence of captures. Is I can take on c6, removing the defender, and after takes I can win the pawn. That looks very clean. And not only do I win the pawn on b5, but now there's 3 attackers against the pawn on d6. And it seems like my opponent is panicking a little bit. Win another pawn. We can trade. And maybe winning a 3rd pawn. Black is counterattacking, so yeah, perhaps it's worth playing f3 first. I mean, there's takes, and then, I mean, we could trade rooks and then takes, and I don't quite have back rank mate because the knight does cover d8. So I'm really just debating between f3 or bishop takes e5. I think I'll just take on c5, just simplify a little bit. And we can take and move the rook back. And then make some error for the king. So no back rank mates. I'll put the bishop on e3. At first, this seems a little bit unnatural because bishop's not defended and aligned with the rook. But my king just defends, and the bishop does a nice job of restricting the knight. And now going forward from here, the strategy to win such an endgame position is to make progress on the side where I have the pawn majority. In this case, it's 3-on-1. So eventually I want to be pushing my queenside pawns. I also want to be winning more pawns. It looks like I'm going to eventually win the a pawn. There is a move knight c7 here, but then I have rook c6 to pin the knight. Okay, so my opponent resigns. Yeah, if knight c7, just to show rook c6, I would pin the knight and then eventually win material with bishop f4 or bishop e6. So I think that was a pretty clean game. Hopefully a very important lesson to take away from that game about how to punish the opponent for playing this early c5 move and weakening not only the d6 pawn, but also the d5 square. Yeah, just going back, playing through the opening. Yeah, this is kind of a standard way to play the Philidor defense. Usually instead of c5, black will play c6, with one idea to play pawn b5. And maybe I can quickly analyze here, like if my opponent were to play this move, A standard response is to play a4 to simply prevent pawn b5, but I'm wondering if I could have started with rook e1, allow pawn b5, and then take, with the idea that after takes, bishop d5, I'm trapping the rook. Does this work? No, it doesn't. But why? Takes, bishop d5, takes. So the engine's saying black is better. Takes. Ah, is the queen getting trapped? Engine says queen d7. Ah, and then after takes, there's knight c6. So this is an example where the tactics can backfire. Black, unlike the second game I played in this episode, black is castled, the rook is now aligned with the queen, and bishop e7 is pretty much impossible to stop. And yeah, I'd have to eventually give away my queen. So that is a nice kind of instructive moment. Like sometimes when you spot these tactics, they don't always work so nicely. And in this case, yeah, maybe the better move is to play a4 just to prevent black from playing b5 and try and keep a grip on the position. But okay, none of that happened. Opponent played c5. And yeah, I think the play was actually pretty simple this game. Just making sure that I control the d5 square, improve the pieces, and eventually my opponent gifted some material. We traded down, and I got a winning endgame position. So, yeah, I think that's a nice game to end the episode on. Thanks everyone for watching. If you like the content, do subscribe. It does help the channel. And as always, if you have questions, do leave them below. Look forward to reading the comments, and I'll see you guys soon.